Nobody in the restaurant could silence the billionaire's baby. Not the waiters with their forced smiles. Not the head chef barking orders from the kitchen. Not the billionaire himself, whose wealth and power had bent the world for years, but now trembled useless before the cries of his own child. The sound pierced through polished chandeliers, bounced off marble floors, and shattered the illusion of control in that grand, glittering room. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died into silence, and in that silence, pride began to crack. The restaurant had been built for prestige, tall ceilings, golden decor, waitstaff trained to perfection. Here, every detail was meant to prove power, wealth, and control. But all of it crumbled beneath the desperate wails of one small child. The baby's cries grew sharper, louder, carrying the kind of helplessness no diamond, no fortune, no empire could silence. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The wealthy guests exchanged sharp whispers, their judgment slicing into the father's pride. How could a man so powerful be so powerless now? The billionaire's hands trembled as he rocked his son, but the cries only grew. He summoned the staff with a wave. Waiters hurried, offering toys, desserts, distractions, but the baby screamed louder still. Sweat formed on the father's temple. His mask of composure cracked at its edges. To the world, he was untouchable. To this child, he was nothing more than a man lost in panic. And then, silence broke with a sound no one expected. A soft hum, a steady rhythm, a quiet voice not of authority, not of wealth, but of calm courage. From the corner of the room, almost hidden in the shadows, a little girl stepped forward. She was only 7 years old, with deep brown eyes that carried both innocence and wisdom, her dark brown skin glowing in the dim golden light. Her clothes were simple, worn from days helping her mother sweep the floors. But her presence commanded what money could not. She was the waitress's daughter. To the wealthy, she was invisible. To her mother, she was everything. And in this moment, she became more than anyone imagined. At first, no one noticed her. The girl walked slowly, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed not on the glaring executives or the furious whispers, but on the child himself. The baby's eyes, red, swollen, desperate, locked onto hers. She tilted her head, whispered softly, and then reached out with a gentleness that silenced the storm. And just like that, the crying stopped. The room froze. Gasps rippled through the air. Waiters halted mid-step. The billionaire's jaw slackened, disbelief flashing across his face as he watched his child, calm in the arms of a girl he hadn't even known was there. The baby clung to her shirt, tiny fingers gripping with trust, his sobs melting into quiet sniffles, then into peace. It was unthinkable. No amount of wealth, no number of staff, no polished skill had succeeded. But this child, a waitress's daughter, had done it in moments. The silence in the restaurant was louder than applause. Every guest stared, their expressions caught between shock and awe. Executives who had mocked the chaos now leaned forward, their eyes locked on the little girl who carried a calmness none of them possessed. The billionaire sat frozen. For the first time in years, his power meant nothing. His wealth had failed him. His reputation could not protect him. And yet, in this moment of desperation, salvation had come not from the boardrooms of power or the gilded walls of wealth, but from the smallest, quietest figure in the room. The waitress gasped softly in the corner, her hands trembling as she realized what her daughter had done. She hadn't taught her child this. She hadn't prepared her for this. But the truth was clear. Her daughter carried something rare, something priceless, something that no amount of money could ever buy. The guests whispered. The baby cooed softly in the girl's arms. And the billionaire could only stare, because in the end, it wasn't the restaurant, the staff, or his empire that silenced the storm. It was the one person nobody had noticed, the janitor's daughter, the smallest voice, the calm that no power could command. And though the cries had stopped, the true story had only begun. The restaurant remained frozen. For a long moment, nobody dared to move, nobody dared to speak. The only sound was the soft, steady breathing of the billionaire's baby, resting peacefully in the arms of the waitress's daughter. It was impossible, unthinkable, yet undeniable. The billionaire, a man whose name commanded respect in every corner of the world, sat motionless in his leather chair. His hands, still trembling from the storm of panic, clutched at the tablecloth as he tried to comprehend what had just unfolded. This was a man used to solutions, swift, expensive, flawless. Yet here, before the entire room, his wealth had failed him. His pride had failed him. The finest waiters, the best staff, the most exquisite luxuries, nothing had silenced his child. Nothing, until her. The executives seated around him exchanged uneasy glances. These were men polished in expensive suits, their ties perfectly knotted, their faces carved with arrogance. But now every eye betrayed the same truth. They were stunned. Their whispered mockery from moments before had turned to silence, their smug confidence shattered by the sight of a little girl holding more power than all of them combined. The girl herself said nothing. She simply rocked the baby gently, her dark brown skin glowing in the golden light, her small fingers brushing comfort across the infant's cheek. Her brown eyes, deep and steady, never wavered. She was only 7 years old, yet in that moment, she held the authority of a queen. And the restaurant, this palace of prestige, belonged to her. The billionaire leaned forward, his jaw tightening, his pride wrestling with disbelief. How could this be? How could a child, a waitress's daughter, succeed where he had failed? The weight of humiliation pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. But beneath the humiliation, something even more dangerous stirred: awe. He spoke softly, his voice breaking the silence like glass. "How?" The little girl looked up, blinking at him with innocence unshaken by power. She didn't answer with words, not at first. Instead, she smiled, a smile small, simple, but filled with a quiet confidence that silenced every doubt. Then, with the same calm tone she had used to soothe the baby, she whispered, "Sometimes you don't need power. Sometimes you just need love." The words, though soft, slammed into the room like thunder. Executives shifted uncomfortably. The billionaire's lips parted, but no response came. For a man who had built his empire on dominance, the idea was foreign, alien, and yet undeniable. His baby stirred gently, clinging tighter to the girl, his small sigh breaking the weight of the silence. Gasps echoed across the room. Guests leaned closer, whispering furiously to one another. The billionaire's legend, built on control, had been undone by a child, whose name no one even knew. The waitress stood frozen by the wall, her hands pressed over her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. This was her daughter, the one she had raised alone, the one she had carried through hardship, the one she had believed the world would never notice. And yet here she was, commanding respect in a room where money had always dictated worth. The baby cooed again, this time softly laughing in the girl's arms. The sound, pure, unforced, broke the last thread of disbelief. Executives who once scoffed now leaned in with expressions of reverence. Some even smiled, unable to deny what they had witnessed. And the billionaire? He sat back slowly, his chest rising with a shaky breath. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long forgotten, something wealth could never buy, something power could never command. He felt humbled. But beneath his awe, another truth began to grow. This girl was no ordinary child. She was something more, and the world would not leave her unnoticed any longer. The silence in the restaurant had turned into something heavier: reverence. The girl still cradled the baby, her small hands steady, her brown eyes filled with a calmness that no luxury or title could ever buy. Around her, men in suits, executives worth millions, shifted nervously, unsure if they had just witnessed a miracle or a humiliation. The billionaire leaned forward, elbows pressed against the table, his sharp eyes locked on the child. For a man who built his empire by bending the world to his will, the truth was unshakable. This little girl had done what he could not. She had touched something beyond power, beyond reason. Slowly he stood. The sound of his chair, scraping against the marble floor, sliced through the quiet, pulling every gaze toward him. His presence, once overwhelming, now seemed fragile, stripped of its usual armor. For the first time, the world's richest man looked human. He walked forward, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the stunned silence. The girl glanced up at him unafraid, still rocking his baby with the quiet grace of someone far older than her years. The billionaire stopped just inches away, His baby opened sleepy eyes, cooing softly in her arms, and reached out toward him. But instead of taking the child, the billionaire's hand dropped to the little girl's shoulder. His voice, deep yet trembling, filled the room. "You've given me what no one else could. Not my wealth, not my power, not even the greatest doctors in the world." Gasps rippled across the guests. The executives shifted uneasily, their pride cracking under the weight of his words. The billionaire turned, addressing everyone, his voice steady now, ringing with authority that carried beyond the room. "Remember this night. Remember this girl, because what you just witnessed is proof that greatness does not bow to wealth. It lives where no one dares to look. It shines in those the world overlooks." He faced the girl again, his eyes softened. His pride shattered and rebuilt into respect. Then, with a single gesture that no one expected, he bowed his head to her. The world's most powerful man bowed to a waitress's daughter. The restaurant erupted. Some gasped, some whispered in disbelief, but none could deny the truth. This was not pity. This was not charity. This was honor. The waitress, tears streaming down her face, stepped forward. She had carried plates through this place for years, ignored, unseen, treated as nothing more than a shadow. Now her daughter stood at the center of it all, commanding respect from a man who ruled empires. Their eyes met, and the billionaire nodded toward her too, a gesture that carried more weight than 1,000 apologies. Finally, the billionaire held out his hands. The little girl carefully placed his baby back into his arms. The child stirred, peaceful, safe. And the billionaire whispered almost to himself, "You've taught me the one thing I never learned, the value of humility." The executives had no words. Their silence spoke louder than applause. In that moment, it wasn't the billionaire's empire that defined power. It wasn't the wealth, the prestige, or the fame. It was the courage of a little girl and the dignity of a family who refused to be invisible. That night, legends were rewritten. Not in the language of contracts or money, but in the quiet heartbeat of a baby, the steady hands of a child, and the bow of a man who had finally learned that true greatness lives where the world least expects it.